I wasn't more than 300 feet from touchdown when I realized something was terribly wrong. Below me, stretched across the grass strip I had personally cleared, leveled, and maintained for years, were rows of plastic lawn chairs. Not just a couple, dozens. Scattered between them were pastel tables with checkered tablecloths, helium balloons, a lemonade stand, and dead center where my wheels were supposed to kiss the ground was Karen holding up a big, crooked sign that read, "Welcome to the HOA Spring Social," as if she were the queen of the skies. I blinked hard, thinking maybe the glare off the windshield was messing with me, but no. She was smiling and waving like she owned the place, completely unaware that my landing pattern didn't include a party. It wasn't like I was just joyriding or had stumbled upon this by accident. This was my land, my private airstrip, legally registered and marked, a lifeline for supply runs and the occasional joy flight to clear my head. I'd owned this little patch of heaven for nearly a decade, tucked just outside the reach of the city, but barely outside the claws of the HOA, which Karen ran like a dictatorship. Over the years, Karen had waged small wars. Complaints about the noise of my Cessna trying to block deliveries, and even passive-aggressively mailing me noise ordinances that only applied to commercial airports, not my little grass strip. I'd brushed it off because, until now, it was just the usual HOA nonsense. But this was sabotage disguised as suburban festivity. My heart slammed against my ribs as I adjusted the controls. There was no room to land. The entire runway was cluttered with chairs, tables, and people sipping sweet tea like they were on a picnic, not about to be the unwilling extras in an air disaster. The wind wasn't in my favor, and the alternative landing area, a rough patch near the woods, was risky, but it was either that or turn my neighbors into runway debris. I circled once, my gut twisting as I radioed an emergency call. Karen just kept waving, oblivious or, more likely, willfully ignorant. I had no choice. I lined up with the ragged strip of grass just beyond the trees. The wings grazed the tops of the pines, and I could hear branches scrape along the undercarriage. My landing gear kissed the ground too hard, bouncing once, before I managed to get her under control and roll out safely, albeit with a worrying shudder from the left wheel. When I finally brought the plane to a stop, I yanked open the door, adrenaline boiling over, and stormed across the field toward the spectacle on what was supposed to be my runway. Karen was surrounded by a gaggle of HOA loyalists, all dressed in matching polo shirts and sipping from plastic cups like this was some high society affair. The guests scattered as I approached, the tension so thick it could choke a bull. Karen, for her part, looked at me like I was the one interrupting. She tilted her sunglasses down and smirked. "Oh, we didn't think you'd be using the runway today," she said, voice dripping with sugary condescension. Didn't think? This wasn't a walking trail or a garden plot. This was an active, marked airstrip. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I pointed toward my battered Cessna, now sitting unevenly thanks to the botched landing. The left wheel strut was visibly bent. This wasn't a minor inconvenience. This was expensive, dangerous, and borderline criminal. Karen just waved her hand like I was complaining about a crooked mailbox. "Oh, it's just a little plane," she said. "We figured it could go around." I swear, for a moment I considered whether anyone would blame me if I burst into uncontrollable laughter or tears. Instead, I clenched my jaw and told myself to keep it together. I wasn't about to give Karen the satisfaction of seeing me crack. The rest of the guests filtered away, murmuring excuses about errands and appointments. Old Man Jenkins, a grizzled neighbor with a wicked sense of humor, leaned against his cane and whispered, "Bet you wish you'd landed right on top of that lemonade stand." I didn't answer, but I couldn't deny the thought had crossed my mind. Karen, now realizing she might have pushed too far, tried to smooth things over with a forced giggle. "We're all neighbors here," she said. "Surely we can work something out." Work something out? The sheer audacity left me speechless for a second. I'd just been forced into an emergency landing, scraped up my plane, and could have easily crashed. And she was talking about working something out like I'd parked in her spot at the grocery store? As I stood there, fuming, I noticed something else. Along the edges of the strip were small, freshly hammered-in signs that read Future Site of HOA Community Recreation Area. It wasn't just a party. This wasn't spontaneous. This was a claim. Karen had staged a hostile takeover of my airstrip. The anger dissolved into something colder, sharper, and far more dangerous than rage. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I could feel it in my bones. She thought she'd outmaneuvered me. But if there was one thing Karen didn't know about me, it's that I always finish what I start. And I wasn't about to let some HOA princess turn my runway into her lawn chair kingdom. Not today. Not ever. I spent the next morning pacing circles around the damaged Cessna, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise light up the bent strut like some cruel joke. The gouges along the wing, courtesy of Karen's impromptu obstacle course, were deep enough to make any pilot wince. Repairing it wasn't going to be cheap, and the real kicker? Karen didn't seem the least bit sorry. If anything, she strutted around like she'd just won the neighborhood bake-off. I hadn't slept much, too busy replaying the landing and Karen's smug little smile over and over. This wasn't some innocent misunderstanding. This was a power move. I headed to the local diner, a worn-out spot with chipped booze and bottomless coffee, but it was where the real decisions of this town got made. Sure enough, when I walked in, half the regulars were already there, whispering about the airstrip incident. Old man Jenkins raised his mug and beckoned me over. Before I could even sit down, someone slid me a plate of pancakes and a sympathy look. Word traveled fast around here, especially when Karen was involved. Everyone knew she fancied herself queen of the HOA, but taking over someone's private airstrip? That was a new level of crazy. She's got plans, Jenkins muttered between bites. Saw her down at the county office last week. Thick stack of papers in hand. Looked mighty pleased with herself too. That wasn't good. Karen didn't just throw parties. She schemed. And if she'd gone to the county, this was more than a social event gone wrong. I left the diner and drove straight to the county clerk's office, heart pounding. It took a little convincing, but thanks to some old-school charm and the fact that half the office knew my dad back in the day, I got a peek at the public filings. There it was, in black and white. Karen had submitted a proposal to designate my airstrip as a community recreation area, claiming it was abandoned and unsafe. She even included photos, cropped and angled just right, to make it look like the place hadn't seen a plane in years. I felt the heat rise to my face. Karen knew exactly what she was doing. The kicker? If the proposal got approved, I'd lose the legal right to operate flights here. The airstrip, my airstrip, would officially belong to the HOA. The fact that it was on my land didn't even seem to slow her down. It wasn't just about the airstrip anymore. This was about control. Karen wanted it all, and she was willing to bend the truth until it snapped. By the time I got back to the diner, I had a plan simmering. This wasn't the first time I'd had to outthink Karen, but it sure as heck was going to be the last. I pulled together a few of the regulars, people who knew the history of this place. Jenkins, of course, grumbled his way into the mix. Then there was Miss Patty, who ran the general store, and the Wright brothers. Not actually brothers, just two guys with the same last name who happened to fix everything from tractors to toasters. If Karen wanted a fight, she was going to get one. First things first, we gathered every scrap of documentation we could find proving the airstrip was still active. Flight logs, fuel receipts, maintenance records, even pictures of me landing the Cessna as recently as last month. Miss Patty even dug up an old local news article featuring the airstrip's grand opening years ago. It was more than enough to sink Karen's narrative, but I knew better than to play my whole hand too early. That night, as I was closing up the hangar, headlights lit up the driveway. Karen, of course. She stepped out in heels unsuited for gravel and strutted over like she was walking a red carpet. I leaned against the hangar door, arms crossed, waiting to see what flavor of nonsense she was peddling. "I hope you're not taking this personally," she said, fake concern practically dripping from her words. "The community just needs more recreational space, and this land has been underutilized." "Underutilized," I repeated. "Funny. The skid marks from my landing gear disagree." Karen smiled like I was a child who'd just said something silly. "Oh please. We'll find you a new spot. There's a lovely clearing past the woods. No need to be stubborn." My jaw tightened. She wanted me to abandon my own airstrip like it was some misplaced garden hose. I didn't bother arguing. Karen wasn't the type to listen. I just tipped my hat and said, "Good night, Karen," before walking away. Let her think she had me cornered. Let her feel victorious. The next morning, it got worse. Karen had put up temporary fencing all along the runway, complete with laminated signs reading, "Future HOA Park, coming soon." Like this was already a done deal. I counted at least a dozen chairs still left behind, probably as placeholders for whatever chaos she had planned next. Flyers were stapled to every fence post, advertising a massive community event scheduled for the weekend. It wasn't just a one-time tea party anymore. She was staging a full invasion. But here's the thing Karen didn't know. I'd already filed my own report. Not with the county, but with the FAA. I sent them every record, every picture, every detail of her obstructing an active airstrip. The best part? Karen had no clue. She was too busy printing flyers and ordering portable toilets to notice the federal government was about to come knocking. Back at the diner, we huddled over a rough map of the area, plotting out how to reinforce the strip legally and safely while keeping Karen in the dark. Jenkins chuckled the entire time, muttering about how he hadn't had this much fun since the Great Goat Stampede of '03. We marked every boundary, every historical document, and every witness statement. We were building a case, not just against Karen's party, but against her entire scheme. By the time I got home that night, the air was thick with anticipation. I could practically hear the countdown ticking in my head. Karen thought she'd won. She thought she'd taken the runway right out from under me. But she had no idea that the storm brewing wasn't just coming from me, it was coming from the sky. And when it hit, it was going to hit hard. Saturday came faster than I expected, and with it, the spectacle Karen had promised. By mid-morning, my airstrip was swarming with lawn chairs, folding tables, bouncy castles, and more HOA members than I'd ever seen in one place. It looked like a cross between a county fair and a bad reality show. Karen paraded around like the star of the whole production, directing people with a clipboard and flashing her plastic smile. She had the audacity to even set up a makeshift main stage smack in the middle of the runway, complete with cheap speakers blasting elevator music. She wasn't hiding it anymore. In her mind, the airstrip was already hers, and I was just an angry neighbor too stubborn to know when he'd lost. What Karen didn't know was that while she was busy setting up lemonade stands and organizing sack races, I had quietly arranged something much more official. 2 FAA inspectors were due to arrive before noon, responding to my complaint. They weren't the kind of people to announce themselves early, and they certainly weren't the type to ignore safety violations, especially ones involving an active airstrip being turned into a backyard carnival. I had kept quiet all week, letting Karen think I was licking my wounds while, in truth, I was fueling up for the finale. By late morning, I could see the inspectors parked quietly at the far end of the property, clipboards in hand, already taking photos of the chaos. Karen hadn't noticed yet, too busy clapping along to a group of kids playing a kazoo rendition of the HOA anthem. Meanwhile, I was prepping my freshly repaired Cessna, ready to give them exactly the show they came for. The Wright brothers had worked miracles on the landing gear and patched up the wing, and while it wasn't showroom perfect, it was more than ready for what I had planned. I waited until the crowd was thick, the music was loud, and Karen was giving some syrupy speech about community spirit into a crackling microphone. Then, with a flick of a switch, the Cessna's engine roared to life. From my spot in the cockpit, I could see heads turn. A few folks pointed, others just squinted. Karen, to her credit, kept right on speaking, probably assuming I was just trying to make a scene. She had no idea just how big of a scene she was about to get. I taxied slowly, deliberately, toward the far edge of the strip, giving everyone a good long look at the fact that I wasn't bluffing. People shuffled nervously. A couple of kids cheered, thinking maybe this was part of the day's entertainment. Karen, still holding her microphone, marched toward the middle of the runway, waving her hands like she was guiding traffic at a mall parking lot. "You can't be serious," she yelled, her voice echoing from the cheap speakers. "This is a community event. This is an active airstrip," I said under my breath, pushing the throttle forward. The Cessna surged ahead, engine thundering, propeller slicing the air like a saw. The crowd panicked. Chairs flipped. Tables crashed. Balloons exploded like popcorn. People scattered left and right, tripping over each other, spilling drinks, and screaming as I barreled straight down the center line. Karen froze, eyes wide, as I passed within feet of her, sending her sun hat cartwheeling through the air. I could see the FAA inspectors from the corner of my eye, jotting notes with the kind of satisfaction usually reserved for courtroom verdicts. I pulled up gracefully, wheels lifting just before the end of the strip, and circled once overhead. From up there, it looked like a battlefield. The party was over. The decorations were trampled. The bouncy castle lay deflated like a sad balloon animal, and Karen was standing alone at center field, stunned into silence. I could have flown off into the horizon, but I wasn't done. I landed again, this time clean and deliberate, right where I was supposed to, reclaiming the strip in front of everyone. When I climbed out, the crowd was already thinning, guests hurrying to their cars, looking anywhere but at Karen. The FAA inspectors approached, credentials out, and asked Karen if she was the event organizer. For once, Karen had nothing to say. They wasted no time listing off the violations: obstructing an active airstrip, unauthorized public event on private property, reckless endangerment, and about half a dozen other charges that made Karen's knees visibly buckle. She tried to protest, of course, blaming me, blaming the neighbors, even suggesting the signs had been misleading. But the inspectors weren't buying it. They had all the proof they needed. Photos, reports, and even a recording of Karen herself announcing the event as the new community space. Jenkins wandered up beside me, munching on popcorn from a bag he definitely hadn't bought at the event. "Best air show I've seen in years," he said without looking at me. 5 stars. Karen, realizing the situation was spiraling, tried to rally the remaining HOA members, but most of them were already backing away, shaking their heads, muttering about how they hadn't known it was illegal. Without her usual audience of loyal followers, Karen looked smaller somehow, like a stage actress after the curtain drops and the applause never comes. One of the inspectors turned to me. "We'll be in touch soon about next step. Don't worry, we've seen enough." I nodded, thanking them, watching as Karen stomped away in her heels, wobbling slightly as if the ground itself wasn't sure it wanted to hold her up anymore. She disappeared into the crowd of scattered neighbors, who were already making excuses to leave, carrying folding chairs and ruined decorations to their cars without so much as a goodbye. The field was quiet again, the kind of silence you can only appreciate after chaos. The runway, scarred but intact, stretched out before me like it always had, waiting. And for the first time in a long while, I realized Karen might have just picked a fight she couldn't win. But if I knew anything about Karen, it was that she wouldn't go quietly. Not yet. There was still something brewing behind those tight smiles and HOA newsletters. The storm wasn't over. Not just yet. The following week, the neighborhood was humming with rumors. Word about Karen's failed airstrip takeover spread faster than wildfire in dry grass. Every corner of town seemed to have a different version of the story. Some folks swore I buzzed the lemonade stand on purpose, others said Karen fainted right there on the runway, though sadly I knew that part wasn't true. The important part was that, for the first time in years, people weren't afraid to question Karen's antics. The HOA's tight little web of control had started to unravel, and the threads were coming loose faster than she could tie them back together. I figured Karen would lay low, maybe lick her wounds for a while, but I underestimated her appetite for digging her own grave. A few days later, I found a certified letter stuffed in my mailbox. It was Karen, of course, dressed up in legal jargon. She claimed I had endangered the public by landing during a sanctioned neighborhood event and demanded a formal apology, damages for the ruined community celebration, and, most absurd of all, requested I voluntarily suspend all flight operations until further notice. I nearly choked on my coffee reading it. I wasn't sure if she was brave, delusional, or both, but what I was sure of was that Karen didn't know when to quit. The thing about messing with a pilot is, once we're in the air, we always have an exit strategy. And I had mine ready. I handed the letter directly to the FAA inspectors, who had returned to complete their investigation. They barely glanced at it before shaking their heads. They informed me that Karen wasn't just in violation of federal aviation regulations, she was flirting with criminal charges for falsifying documents, trespassing, and obstructing an active airstrip. The FAA didn't deal in neighborhood politics. They dealt in facts, laws, and safety. And Karen had crossed every line they cared about. They told me to sit tight, let the process play out, and they'd handle it. But I wasn't about to just sit back and let Karen regroup. I took time that week to restore the runway properly, clearing every stray chair, sign, and tacky decoration she left behind. The neighbors started showing up without me even asking. Jenkins brought his old tractor to help flatten out some rough spots. Miss Patty showed up with sandwiches and a thermos of coffee. Even a few of the quieter HOA members, perhaps realizing Karen's ship was sinking, lent a hand. There was no big speech, no official meeting, just a quiet understanding that the airstrip wasn't just mine. It was a part of the town, and no one was about to let Karen turn it into a picnic spot. Karen, meanwhile, was unraveling right in front of everyone. She called a surprise HOA meeting at the community center, hoping to rally her troop. I went, out of sheer curiosity, and sat in the back while she paced at the front like a general trying to salvage a retreat. She claimed I had endangered lives, that I was reckless, and that the FAA was overreacting. But it was clear the room wasn't buying it. One by one, neighbors raised their hands, calmly reminding her that it was, in fact, a registered and actively used airstrip, and that she had thrown a party on it without permission. Karen's eyes darted from face to face, watching as the loyalty she had once commanded slipped away like water through her fingers. By the end of the meeting, the board voted to suspend Karen indefinitely pending the outcome of the FAA's investigation. She stormed out, muttering under her breath about ungrateful neighbors and small-town ignorance, but no one followed. They were too busy drafting a formal apology to me, hoping to patch things up before things got worse. I accepted, of course, but not before reminding them that the airstrip would remain exactly what it was always meant to be, a lifeline, not a lawn party. A week later, the FAA wrapped up their investigation and handed down the official decision. Karen was fined heavily, and worse for her, referred to the county prosecutor for falsifying government documents. It wasn't just an HOA squabble anymore. It was now officially a legal matter, and I could tell by the way she avoided eye contact at the diner that she knew it. Her husband, who usually trailed behind her like a sad puppy, had started eating breakfast alone. That Saturday, I decided to host a small, legal, and fully FAA-cleared community barbecue on the side of the airstrip. No flyers, no banners, no grandstanding. Just neighbors, good food, and a little celebration of common sense. Folks showed up in droves, some bringing dishes, others just coming to finally enjoy a peaceful day without worrying about HOA drama. Jenkins played harmonica terribly but with enthusiasm, and for the first time in a while, laughter replaced gossip as the dominant sound in the air. As the sun dipped behind the hills, I noticed Karen standing alone by the edge of the field, arms crossed, watching. She didn't come closer, didn't say anything, just stared. Maybe she was too proud, maybe she was trying to figure out her next move, or maybe, just maybe, she realized she had finally lost. I didn't wave. I didn't need to. The quiet was enough. Later that evening, as I was locking up the hangar, I found one last parting gift. Karen had stuffed a petty little note into my mailbox. No envelope, just a handwritten scrawl that read, "Enjoy your little runway while you can." No signature, but it didn't need one. I chuckled, folded it neatly, and tucked it into the logbook under miscellaneous. The thing about people like Karen is they never really go away. They fume, they plot, they sulk, but when you stand your ground with enough patience and grit, they usually end up tripping over their own schemes. And if they come back, well, I've still got the runway, the plane, and a whole town of folks who won't be fooled twice. The sky is still mine, and I'm ready for takeoff whenever I please.